Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the right, I'm Gary Polland.
And from the left, I'm David Jones.
Tonight we welcome Tom Leppert, former mayor of Dallas and a conservative businessman who is running for the Republican nomination for the U.S. Senate in the March primary. Welcome.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Heavy load you have ahead of you, Mr. Leppert. Businessman and former mayor of Dallas, but orient yourself for us up against what we know are coming after you in the March primary, which the veteran lieutenant governor, veteran politician, insider, Mr. Dewhurst, and this sort of rabble-rouser lawyer, Ted Cruz. So where do you fit in before we talk about all these good things about yourself?
Well, I think we've got a unique perspective, a very different profile than you have, not only in the campaign, but really what you see in Washington and in the United States Senate. As you mentioned, I'm a business person. I am not a professional politician, and I'm actually one of those people that's gone out and created jobs and cut spending. You don't have very much of that. So we think that there is a very different position. I haven't been 10 plus years in elected office, and I've been actually somebody that's gone and signed both sides of a paycheck. And I think that's what people are looking for today. They don't want that professional politician, and they want somebody that actually knows about the economy. I think people are very worried about the economy today. They're worried about their jobs.
So what in the world is a nice man like you who had a good life and you were not a politician and you ran a company, you had a lot of people on a payroll. What are you doing in politics all of a sudden?
Well, originally I kind of got talked into it, running for mayor of Dallas. And when we did that, I think we did some things that you usually don't have happen in government. We reduced spending. There were actually key priorities we identified, and we produced results on those. And now the reality of it is the challenges in front of our nation are going to be economic ones, at least through the remainder of this decade. As I mentioned just a moment ago, you look in the Senate, you just don't have very many people that bring a business background and understand how the economy works, how you really create jobs, how we address the fiscal mess. Those are skills that we need in Washington, and I think I can make a difference.
I think he's telling us, David, that lawyers like us, you and me, don't really know how to create jobs.
Our day is gone. But Tom, you only had one term as mayor of Dallas. Could you have had a second if you wanted it?
Yes. Again, I think we were.
Have you ever run for anything else
well
other than mayor?
No. In fact, 5 years ago, I would have never thought that I'd run for anything. I was a business person, so I never thought that I'd run for anything. But I think what we did in Dallas is, again, some things that you usually don't see. As an example, we identified some key priorities. When I first came into office, public safety was a key priority. Dallas had been at the top of the high crime cities of over 1 million for a long period of time. It no longer is. What we did is we increased the police force. Today, the police force is 20% larger in Dallas than when I took office. Clearly an enormous investment. To finance that, we reduced the civilian workforce by 20%. A lot of programs that we were in, we got out of because the city didn't have any reason to be in them. And then on top of that, we found other ways to do things. For instance, on the zoo, we privatized that and saved $5 million. And the result of that, in the calendar years 8, 9, and 10, violent crime in Dallas went down by a third. Numbers that any city would love to have.
Now, after you privatize the zoo, is it prospered?
It's actually a much better zoo. They've been able to bring in people that they would never have been able to get when it was a municipal holding, and they've ended up with a much better zoo. It's on the verge of perhaps being a first-tier zoo.
Now, Tom, you get to tell us. Now, you get to tell us about all of this great success you had in Dallas, and you had no help from the state of Texas, and you had no help from the federal government. Are you going to tell us you did it all by yourself?
No, more importantly.
And if not, what help did they give you?
More importantly, I'll tell you that in the jobs I've had, I've created thousands of jobs, and no political party and no government ever helped me do that.
Yeah, but the state of Texas writes the criminal laws. I mean, they contribute something to the deterrence of crime. The federal government is either in your way or out of your way as a mayor. You have no complaints about any of that?
The great thing about being mayor is you probably have more accountability being mayor than about any other elected position you can have. Because the reality of it is, most of my accountability came when I was in the checkout line at the grocery store. People knew who I was and engaged in it. What we did is we actually set priorities and we met those. You have to produce results. Unfortunately, I think in Washington, they've lost sight of producing results. If you're a business person, you understand how important it is to produce results. Unfortunately, what we have for the most part in Washington today is people that go in, make speeches, and declare victory. Well, that doesn't create a job and it doesn't cut a dollar of spending. Well, we've got to have people that are more interested in producing results. We clearly did that in Dallas, and I've done it for 25 years of running businesses and a lot of different businesses, small and medium all the way to large in a lot of different industries.
We have the Joint Committee that's been dealing with the overspending in Washington. That who knows what's going to end up happening at the end of the day. What would Tom Leppert do?
Well, I think it's unfortunate that we pay 100 people in the Senate and 435 people in the House, and they couldn't come up with a solution, so they had to kick it to a committee. I can tell you, running businesses, you don't assign things to committees. That's not the answer.
Isn't that where good ideas go to die?
That's where good ideas go to die. And the other thing is, let's look at realistically. We're talking $1.2 trillion. That's about 2.5% of the spending over the next 10 years. The reality of it is we're not dealing with the problems. We're still going to have a debt, even under that scenario, of $17, $18 trillion when we come out to the end of this decade. Now, it may be $1 trillion less, but I learned in business, if you're bankrupt, you're bankrupt.
Well, you're not saying whether the United States is bankrupt.
I'm saying absolutely. We are right at the precipice. You look at the numbers that we have today. We have a debt that is listed of about $15 trillion, an economy that's about the same, so 100%. Those are numbers that are not a lot different than Greece, Spain, et cetera, some folks that we simply don't want to be referred to in the same sentence.
But we can pay our bills. We have wealth that we have is untapped. We can inflate the currency a little bit. We don't depend upon some other country to bail us out. I mean, we can manage our
David?
We can manage our own affairs. Can we not? We have the capacity to make this work.
Well, then the other piece that you've got to add on is where do we stand? A business looks at long-term obligations and long-term liabilities, and they have to show those. If we did that in the United States government, then that number of $15 trillion, that debt, goes to somewhere in the area of $75 trillion. That's $700,000 per household. The reality of it is on the track that we're on, we're going to be just like all those other countries. That's why it is time to have different leadership and people that actually want to make tough decisions. For too long, we've had those professional politicians and those people that have worked for government and they want to be professional politicians. And what they've done is made a lot of short-term decisions that have put you and I in the hole and jeopardize that future that you just referred to.
So the leader of the party that you belong, where you are running, is without a doubt it's Rick Perry. I mean, this is a governor. He's running for president, and he has a plan out. And what he wants to do is he wants to have term limits for the federal judiciary. 18 years is all they get. He wants to cut salaries for Congress in half. He wants to make sure that they can go back to their communities and work. He thinks that's a bad idea, that they should only focus on the government's business. And he wants to sunset all regulations unless Congress reapproves them. In other words, he says we need to uproot, tear down, and rebuild, citing Ecclesiastes as his authority. So is that your brand of Republicanism?
Well, I think the governor's got a lot of good ideas in there. Now, what we've done is laid out an economic plan that we think is the most comprehensive, detailed economic plan that a Senate candidate's ever put out. I'm tired of listening to people, and mostly those politicians, talk in 7-second sound bites. They can talk in one line, but they can't talk the next paragraph, and they surely can't think through a solution. We're not going to solve our problems with 7-second sound bites. So what we've laid out is a comprehensive plan. I wish I could tell you that there was some magic bullet or some, simple thing that we could do that would solve all the problems. It's not. But we laid as a plan that addresses reforming the tax system. Today, there are more words in the tax system than there are in the Holy Bible. That doesn't make any sense. We talk about regulation, key element if we're going to get businesses start making investments, creating jobs. We talk about the spending side. We talk about discipline. We talk about eliminating programs. And finally, we deal head-on with the entitlement programs, with real programs, with specific examples of how we reform those so they not only stay around, but they don't bankrupt all of us. And then finally, we talk about energy policy. We talk about health care. And we talk about how do you change the culture in Washington. We need to do that if we're going to see the changes that we have to have.
Well, let's talk about entitlements, for
Sure.
example. How would you reform the entitlement system if you get to the U.S. Senate?
First of all, for too long, politicians have walked away from entitlements, don't want to deal with it. The reality of it is it's over 40% of our spending today. In a very short number of years, it's going to be over 60%. We can't deal with the fiscal mess unless we're willing to deal with those entitlement programs. Take Social Security as an example. We've got 3 different parts of our plan. Number one is people that are on Social Security. A deal's a deal. In fact, we tell them, a deal's a deal. We're going to cast in concrete. Your benefits, they are there. Nobody's going to touch them. Leave them in. And for some window of planning going into that, I selected 55 years. There's not a magic number attached to that, 55 years. But for those people, a deal's a deal. we're going to ensure that you've got the benefits that you were promised. Then the second piece is we're going to go back for people under 55, and we're going to make changes that are going to ensure that this is sustainable. It is clearly not today. First thing that we're going to do is increase the retirement age and explain to people why. And when Social Security was passed, it was unusual that somebody actually got a retirement check.
And that kicks in when? Raising
you would come in
retirement
over a very short period of time. Again, it's not going to change for people that are 55, but it's going to ramp up very quickly to get to people under 55 to that point. Keep in mind, when Social Security was passed, it was unusual for anybody to get a Social Security check. Because
life expectancy.
Exactly. Life expectancy was less than retirement age. Well, that's switched now to the tune of well over 15 years. Second is have the COLAs, which sounds like a little thing. Cost of living adjustments, a percentage here, a percentage there, sounds like a small number. Reality is when you compound it over decades and you're talking trillions of dollars, it's a lot of money. Make those economic, not political. Both the Republican and Democratic administrations for too long have played the game of political.
Why do we exempt income above $104,000 on the tax?
Let me continue and plan what I did. The next piece of it is to ensure that we've got people working with us. When I was in business, incentives were a great thing. So I want to create incentives. I want to create incentives for people to work longer. It does two things. One is it pushes off the need for us to fund those. The second is while they work, they continue to pay taxes. Both of those are great things. So if you retire at 70, you get one amount. 72, it's a little bit more than that. 75, a little bit more than that. If it was 80 or more, then it's a lot more than that. Create an incentive so that annuity curve, people get a chance to share into it. And then the final piece of it is look at young people and be honest. We've never done that. Look at them and be honest and say, we can't supply the same benefits that your grandparents have. It just doesn't work. Social Security, when it was passed, 42, 43 people were supporting each retiree. Today it's 3-to-1, going pretty close to 2-to-1 because of the demographics. Be honest and say we can't. And just like in business, try to take the problem and figure out where the opportunity is. Can't give them the same benefits, but I can restructure it. I can set it up as a personal account so that all of a sudden the money goes in it. They actually own it. They've got ownership to it. That's a much better structure. And on top of it, governments can't go in and take, as they do today, they can't go in and take money that's in your account.
We have 100 people that signed a letter, 100 members of Congress, 60 Democrats and 40 Republicans, and they all said to the super committee of 12, revenue has to be on the table. We're at a crossroads. We have a lot of debt, and there is no way we can get out of it unless we consider the wealth of the nation and what has not been tapped that can be brought in to balance our books. Good idea or not?
They're looking at it wrong. They're looking at it in static state. I can tell you we're very aggressive in cutting spending. As I said, I talked about entitlement programs. We talk about specific programs plus changing the discipline, balanced budget amendment that's got caps. None of that works unless you've got a growing economy. We have got to grow this economy.
So you would have a trigger, and that spending cuts go into only whenever we see growth. Otherwise, the spending may cost us a lot of jobs if we no longer spend.
All of our program is designed to grow this economy. We need to grow this economy. We need to create jobs. Nobody is ever going to tell you that raising taxes is going to create jobs and push this economy forward.
We can
sit where we are at 0 or 1%. But I can tell you, that doesn't produce opportunities for us or for our children. It certainly doesn't address the fiscal mess that we're in.
I'm not saying. Remember that we raised taxes under Reagan, and we had a good economy. We raised taxes under Clinton, and we had 22 million jobs created while he raised rates.
We brought the tax rates down. By bringing the tax rates down becomes the key. I think we're going to generate more taxes, but we're going to do it because economic activity is going to increase. That's the way to generate income. It's not to turn around and try to increase your tax rate. What I want you to do is go out and make investments. I want you to create jobs. The way I'm going to have you do that is reduce your rates. Now, cumulative, when we all do that, we're going to see an economy that grows, and as the economy grows, that's going to generate a stronger tax base. See, people have looked at it too long. They've looked at taxes as one group wins and one group loses. What we ought to do is look at it as how do we put all these pieces together so that we've got a strong, growing, vibrant economy? Because that's the way that we saw in the 80s and the 90s that we saw a success of the nation. It was because we were growing. People have forgotten that. One piece of it is the fiscal mess. I talked about that a moment ago. But the other side of it is through the way we do taxes, regulatory policy, etc. How do we get this economy to grow? And again, not surprising. You've got politicians that have never created a job in their life. Why should you expect them to do that?
Well, we don't have anybody complaining really about the regulations that some people are saying are the problem with our economy. I mean, National Federation of Independent Business, they asked all of their members, what's the problem with this economy and with your business? They said sales. Nobody's buying anything. I mean, the problem is, you see, that there are people who have lost an enormous amount of wealth and family income, and they are not buying anything. So, you know, what is it that, why wouldn't we want to put money in their pockets, perhaps with some rebates? Or what type of stimulus are you for?
Let's understand how an economy works. Maybe we need to go to the basis of that. Economies fundamentally work because people are willing to make investments. Those investments turn into jobs. Those jobs turn into buying power. That produces demand for products, which then comes back around.
And while people are not making investments, we just sit back and watch.
And
is that it?
The reason
because
people
they're
aren't
not
making
investments.
I can tell you right now, from a business perspective, it's not hard to understand. In the space of less than 18 months, taxes may go up, return taxes by 50%. Number two is, if I make an investment that's got people attached to it, the Obamacare today has more uncertainty and has pushed the costs up for business. So that's why they don't want to add people. We've got an energy policy that doesn't make any sense, that relies on foreign sources as opposed to domestic sources. And I will tell you, go out and talk to small businesses. They will tell you that regulatory is a major issue today. Some of it we see in terms of National Labor Relations Board with Boeing. We see EPA with greenhouse gases. But a lot of it is the little stuff that just has increased costs on small businesses. So in that environment, why should businesses make investments?
And that's why they're cautious.
That's why they're cautious. Collectively, they're individually doing the right thing. Collectively, unfortunately, we don't have an economy that's growing.
You're not seriously saying the energy industry is cautious right now. I mean, they can't find people to fill the jobs that they have available. And they're making money like they've never made before.
But
regulatory impact is nil on them.
Look at what we're doing. We need to provide the sources. I mean, what has been our energy policy? Well, our energy policy is pretty simple.
Not
what
in my
we've
backyard.
done is buy anything you can from anybody you can at any price. That is not a policy. We need common sense, and a lot of it's regulatory. Today in Alaska, we have a pipeline that's at 34% capacity. We can't get an extension of 100 miles to give us new fields that arguably are going to be larger than Prudhoe Bay was. We today, or in the last week, we saw because for political reasons, we pushed over the Keystone Pipeline, which could be an awful lot of jobs, especially here in Houston. And you look at what we've done on the offshore side of it, we've closed ourselves to that. We've got all those resources that means a lot of jobs. And by the way, it's not just an economic issue, it's a national security issue. We continue to send hundreds of billions of dollars over to folks that simply don't like us and want to see harm done to us because we haven't faced up economically, haven't had the political will to deal with the resources that we have here. Today, we're only using about 3% of our energy resources, 3%. Less than 10% are available because from a regulatory standpoint, we've taken them off the table. Let's be serious. National security is important. Building opportunities is important. Let's make sure that we put common sense into this equation.
Are we spending too much money in the defense budget right now? I mean, we're about to lose $500 million unless we do something. I mean, can we accept a cut of that size?
You threw two things out there. Let me respond to both of them. First of all, if that trigger comes into play, we are going to do significant damage to our national defense. We will be making some decisions that are simply not well thought out and are going to put us in the hole. And we have seen in our lifetimes, when we pull back and we don't continue to invest in our national defense, that sooner or later it's going to come back to haunt us. Well, so in that regard, yes, it's a problem. Now, two is, I believe everything should be on the table. I would be viewed as a hawk from a defense standpoint. But I'll also tell you that there are...
On the table in terms of military spending issues?
In terms of military spending. But I'll also tell you, as someone that has dealt with spending, there are significant opportunities, I believe, to reduce the spending and still ensure the strength of our national security.
It's got to be smart spending is what we're talking about.
You know, how much of it today?
Do we still need troops in Germany today?
Well, the biggest thing is get the politics out. Right. I mean, how much of our money, and you sit down, and I've sat down with privates, non-commissioned officers, and 4-stars, and the message is all the same. They will tell you that there's a lot of spending out there that doesn't help our national defense. It's there for political reasons, because some senator, some congressman thought they knew a lot more about defense than our military leaders. Let's go ahead and do that. We haven't audited our Defense Department for decades. Let's make sure that we do that so that all of a sudden we're spending our money in smart ways. I want to see it be effective and efficient.
So how many troops do we need in the Middle East? We're about to bring some home.
There's actually a more important question.
There is a presidential candidate who says we don't need. Mr. Huntsman says we don't need anyone in Afghanistan.
I wanted to ask about Iran, actually, which I think is more important.
Absolutely.
Obviously, that's in the news recently. It's disclosed Iran is getting closer and closer to nuclear weapons. What is Tom Leppert's policy? What do we do?
I agree with you. I think that's the biggest issue facing us, not only in the Middle East, but arguably throughout the world. I simply don't see any scenario where we can allow Iran to have nuclear weapons. If it happens there, it's not only a state-owned. Those will simply go into terrorist hands. That is a situation that makes the Middle East unstable. As a result, it makes the entire world unstable. If that happened, you would see other countries, Saudi Arabia, et cetera, that would move in the same way. You would see an instability and a cloud over this world that all of a sudden we couldn't handle. Now, clearly, I would love to see sanctions, diplomatic, all of those tools being used. But the reality of it is we have to stop short of allowing Iran to have nuclear weapons. We also have to understand that, to be truthful with you, the sanctions haven't been very effective to this point, and we're dealing with people that are very good at lying. It is clear that their efforts that they are going through from research and development standpoint are leading to nuclear weapons. It's not energy, it's not medical. You can see that in terms of the type of facilities, but also the purity of the materials that they're using and those sorts of things.
Yeah, but there's no one serious in Gary's field of expertise, which is foreign policy, as he's trying to get across, who says that we should take out any of their facilities, or that it would do much good if we did.
Actually, we have to prepare ourselves for that. We can make, and again, politicians are real good at it. We can make a short-term decision that kind of voids the problem. I mean, we do it great. Spending most of what we talked about is a lot of politicians that wanted to kick the can down the road. You've got to face the problem and deal with it. What we don't have is problem solvers and people that are willing to make the tough decisions. Now, we can go ahead and void the decision, but I can tell you, in this instance, we're going to pay for that decades into the future.
Yeah, and
we can't afford ourselves.
And don't
to
you
do
think, Tom, that the American people, if you're honest with them, explain the situation, are going to be supportive of leadership that's going to take a strong stand to stop terrorists from having nuclear weapons?
Absolutely. But you hit on a key part. Is we've got politicians that don't like telling the truth. They haven't told us the truth on the economic situation. They haven't told us the truth on spending. They haven't told us what our debt is. Part of it is we need people that are willing to go out and frame these issues in ways that people can understand them and engage in a conversation on how do we solve them.
Are people lying when they say, or misrepresenting our revenue problem whenever they say, Mr. Leppert, we have 400 people in this country who the average income is 340 million people. Their effective tax rate is 17%. Is it going to kill them to be taxed at 20%, so that we can balance our budget?
But let's use real numbers again. Okay, let's use real numbers.
Tom, explain to him first. You can't balance the budget by raising the tax rates, marginal tax rates on millionaires, real millionaires. It just doesn't work.
You can double the entire tax receipts that we have in this government, and you barely cover the deficit. We're bringing in about $2.2 trillion. We're 1.6 in the hole. You're not going to solve the problem. As I said, the only way that we're going to solve the problem is grow. I want people that are going to go out and create jobs and produce that. Now, let's also look at real numbers. The reality of it is the marginal tax rate of people that make $1 million or more is about 24%. It is about 14% for people in the middle income. Also understand, and there was just a report that was put out by the OECD that said the United States of the industrialized world was the most progressive tax system of any. Now, we can go ahead and we can continue to walk down the road towards Western Europe, but we should have seen that that's not a very good system. I was with some French businessmen not long ago. They looked across the table at the end of a dinner and said, we're pretty upset with you. So what do you mean by that? They said, well, we know who we are. We understand the social contract doesn't work. We understand that we have put ourselves so far in debt that the next generation has no opportunities. And through regulation and government, we have squashed the flame of entrepreneurism, creativity, and innovation. We understand who we are. But we always thought that you were the beacon. You were the beacon that was out there where somebody with character and hard work could come up with an idea and generate the benefits of that for themselves. And then the kicker, He goes, and you're becoming just like us.
Having a social contract doesn't sound like a bad thing. You know, I mean, it sounds like, you know, fairness in how we distribute the wealth of the country. It doesn't sound like it's something that we should just ignore when a Walmart executive makes 900 times that of somebody on the floor.
What we need to do, though, and we need to come back to the same point, is create jobs. You can play all we want with redistribution of income. That is not going to see an economy that's going to grow. What we need to do is grow this economy. And I can tell you, as having been somebody that has created thousands of jobs, what we need to do is have policies that allow people to go out and make investments. And the only way to do that is in a capitalist system that allows people to get the benefit of it.
All right, Tom,
Now,
we're
again,
down to 30 seconds, and I want to give you kind of your capsule. How do you win this race?
It's a very clear path for us. We start with a great base in North Texas, high awareness plus high favorables. I think people looked at what we did in Dallas and saw not only the tangible things we talked about, but they saw a dysfunctional government when I walked in, and when I walked out, they saw a government that worked and they could have faith in it. We take that base, we get awareness throughout the remainder of the state. We've raised...
and please remember to spend some money here in Houston, will you?
We absolutely will.
And you seem to be very determined, but we got to stop the show. Thanks for being here, Tom Leppert.
Thank you, Tom.
We invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. Click on the local program bar, red, white, and blue. Watch the shows, follow-up discussion, and until next time, get informed and get active.